Recently, I built up a 9950X and 5080 air-cooled mini-itx video editing system in the NCase M2, but I actually just ended up switching everything over to the M3, and I'll explain why. Welcome to Machines More. On this channel, I cover a variety of tech topics, especially PC building. Today, I'm talking about some experimentation that I did with my own video editing system. Now, I don't use AIOs very often in my personal builds. It's either air cooler or custom loop, custom liquid cooling for me. So why exactly did I just do an AIO build for myself? So I actually really wanted to get an idea of how the bottom mounted radiator could work in an NCase M2 or M3. I actually haven't done this before, and Be Quiet just happened to have asked me to test their latest Pure Loop 3 cooler, the Pure Loop 3LX, and on top of that, Chromax G2's just launched, and I gotta do it up the right way, right? All before Computex coming up, and it just felt like the right time to try it out, and let's get it. Unfortunately, with my mini-itx setup in the M2, the bottom rad actually did not work. I tried that there first. There was just a little bit of extra clearance width that I needed, really. The heatsink on the mini-itx board was getting in the way. The RAM was just slightly too tall, and that pushed, would have pushed the radiator outside the bounds of the case, so I needed more width. And that's where the NCase M3 comes in clutch, because NCase M3 has got that 26 millimeters extra width that allows me some freedom in placing the rad. Still had to go out to almost the edge. But one downside is that the bottom panel doesn't really have a mounting point for the inner part of the rads, but it is at the bottom, so it's gonna be okay. So I swapped it all out, and also swapped out the power supply. So side note, if you followed my previous build log, you probably noticed that I switched power supplies from the Asus Loki SFX-L, which actually turned out to be the reason that I was having those cold start issues with the MSI MPower B850 that I built around, and I switched it to this one here. By the way, the MPower board, really excellent board, loving this, and now that I figured out the cold start issues, I'm ready to wrap up my review on this one. But the Asus Loki power supply wasn't defective or anything. It works perfectly fine with pretty much every setup that I've ever done, but I tried 2 different Loki power supplies, and they all had cold start issues with this board. They just did not want to turn back on after the computer is put to sleep. They didn't want to turn back on after it was shut down, and then you press that power button again. It needed to be unplugged. So it's just one of those incompatibility things, and I will note that if you're interested in this board. Fortunately, on hand I had the NZXT C850 SFX. This is a newer model here. It's not quite as good as the Loki, which is an 80 plus platinum, but this 80 plus gold one works just fine. Everything else in the build is the same, 9950X, and I've got the G-Skill DDR5 here, which I've got running at 6400 megahertz, 1-to-1 UCLK, MCLK, and we've got the Asus Pro Art 5080, and still have the 10G Ethernet card also from Asus, and this 10G card is kind of the main reason that I needed to run an mini-itx board, in addition to mini-itx just being more flexible. Things like having a bottom fan header that totally works great for cable management, and an incredibly convenient M.2 over here, where a second, 2 more slots of RAM would go. You don't need that, so this is really convenient, really nice. It's a big question. Why a bottom mounted radiator? Well, for one, this is mainly for science. This is just not something you do very much. I was curious about it, and I'm fully aware of the issues here, and I'll explain getting around those AIO at the bottom issues in just a second. Constraints, though. I wanted to keep the M3 in inverted mode, and that means putting the GPU at the top. That's going to give you the best GPU thermals, and that means we can either run the radiator on the side or on the bottom. And if we want to prioritize GPU thermals like I wanted to, that means I'm running the radiator as an exhaust, either on the side or on the bottom, right? And if I have a side mounted radiator pointed at me, or close to me, pushing all that hot air at me, especially during gaming, right, that is very uncomfortable. In fact, the previous setup in the M2, that was with the D12L air cooler plus the side panel fan that was a 140mm G2 Chromax. That was also pointed at me, and while I was gaming or the system was under heavy load, you could really feel that now. And with summer around the corner, that's a bad idea, right? So the side-mounted radiator would have had that same issue, but worse since there's two fans. So why not try a bottom-mounted radiator that can exhaust out the bottom, which will disperse away from the user, and then I can combine that with an exhaust fan here at the back to place that at a wall or something like that, right? So you do have to raise the case up though. So the standard feet that the case comes with, these little dots, that's not gonna cut it. This only leaves like, I think like 5-6 millimeters at the bottom. So I 3D printed these 20 millimeter feet. I know it looks funny. In spite of what it looks like, I'm not trying to channel my inner Ronald McDonald, nor am I obsessed with condiments. I just don't have any black filament right now, and I was just trying to use up some random filament that I had lying around. So that's why you kind of see this, you know, do two color thing here, because I switched filaments in between. Just trying to use it up for a prototype, right? So once I figure out if these are good, then I'll print something more final, since the height ended up seemingly working okay here. So normally the issue with bottom mounted radiators is that if your pump is in the CPU block, which that's how most AIOs are designed these days, it's bottom radiator means that this is going to be the highest point in your system, or close to the highest point in your system, referring to just this AIO, the self-enclosed liquid system, right? So there's going to be air pockets that eventually migrate or collect in your pump block, and that's going to impact your pump's life, because that means your pump is running dry at some point and it's not getting cooled, and that's not good, right? And that's also going to cause noise at a minimum, even if you don't see those longevity issues. So, you know, you might hear bubbling, or the air mixing or getting chopped up with the liquid, and that's no fun. Now, this is not an issue that is unique to AIOs, believe it or not. It's just that in a custom loop, most of the time you have a standalone pump with a reservoir that collects the air, so that doesn't get into the system, and it has extra liquid to keep the system topped off. But if you have a combo DDC pump block, this would be an issue too, because if you're not topped off and air is in your system, it's going to migrate into the pump if it's in the same setup, and that's going to have issues, probably even more, because DDC pumps run really hot and they rely on the liquid for some of that cooling. So way back when I first started covering PC stuff, I reviewed the Pure Loop from Be Quiet, this first generation, and that was a unique unit because it had an inline pump that sat in between the radiator and the block. So whenever you had a radiator, it doesn't matter if it was top, side, bottom, whatever, that pump was going to be in the middle of the loop. It would never be at the very top. And as I discovered with the Pure Loop 3 here, unfortunately, they changed the design. And at first I was a little disappointed when I opened the box and saw that, because that was what was truly unique about the Pure Loop cooling system. But the Pure Loop 3 actually still has a significant advantage for the setup, because you can fill them up yourself. So similar to how if you have a combo block custom loop, you just have to fill it up fully and make sure you bleed out all the air. So what I did was I just ran the pump and I shook it around a little bit. I put more liquid in there. This design also alleviates the concern where as liquid diffuses through this tubing over time, you can just open up the port, top it off, and that makes this configuration actually okay. I would have no concerns about running this setup long term. So I just wanted to test that and see how it would work out airflow wise, and I think this will actually work well. So eventually I may throw in a combo DDC pump block at some point, or maybe even just water block the GPU, because I did take apart the other liquid cooled build that I had in the M3, that 285K one. So maybe stay tuned for that. But in terms of this being or not being a viable airflow configuration, it can work. You just need the right unit. You need to be able to top it off and then bleed out all the air bubbles. And I didn't hear too much noise with the air bubbles or anything like that, except when I first, before I filled it up. So with the Pure Loop 3LX, you can plop in some stencil designs. It's kind of funny since the box says there's no other Pure Loop 3LX like this one. Just the fact that there's 10 options that someone else can also choose the same one from. But I did get a kick out of this particular design here, and I kind of like that throwback. Otherwise, it seems to be a decent unit. The stock fans do feel very, very cheap, and it does start at around $90 US. So it's not great if you're just gonna, throw out the fans right away. I actually don't even see myself using those as case fans either. They just don't seem like they're very good fans. And if you just want performance, I would do the Silent Loop 3, because at least those come with the Silent Wings 4, which are very good, and I've reviewed that unit. It's only going to run 110 with those performance fans that you will want to keep. But like I said, if you don't need high-end fans and you're just going to pull them out and put in your own, and you want to save as much money as you can, right now on the refillable units, there's also a Pure Loop 3, the non-LX option, and that runs 80 or so. So that's definitely an option to check out as well. The light loop, like I showed in the TR200 build recently, that can also be topped off. So I was going to swap out fans anyway. No better time to swap in some Chromax action, right? Just launched a couple days ago, and yeah, this is the PXP set, and I put the A and B next to each other, and I also put the standalone G2 at the back as an exhaust, and that's it for now. I don't have any more. So at the top, to help feed the GPU, I placed 2 G1 Chromaxes. And good and bad with this short cable design. The good thing is they can just connect to a splitter very cleanly, and you can't do that with the new ones. So intaking at the top, feeding the GPU, exhausting at the back, and exhausting at the bottom. So this is going to create an airflow situation where it's going to help the GPU out and minimize the impact on the CPU thermals, just because we're able to exhaust out the back as well. We've got this big mesh side panel that air can come in through as well. And the thermals are actually quite good. I kept settings exactly the same. Curve offset for the 9950X, and I capped it at power limit at 150 watts. For the 9950X, which is actually a pretty severe power limit, but you get a lot of performance out of it this way. With the D12L in the M2 and that single A12x25R fan running full speed, thermals were just okay. It's much louder considering the high RPM, but it was good considering the limitations that were imposed on it. But it really needed the curve offset, and it really needed the power limit to work in the M2. Now, liquid cooled with this 240, you don't need any of those if you don't want it. The fans could stay at 1000 or 1050 RPM, and just look at those temps, right? Now that doesn't mean the D12L in the M2 was bad. That was just a fringe case given the components that I chose. And in fact, I still kind of prefer the simplicity of that setup. We could, of course, do that here with the D15G2, right? But for the liquid cooled setup, when you use the best 120mm fans in the world right now, this is what you can get with these. And with this setup, I would have no concerns running the CPU at full power, but I kind of like how efficient and how quiet it is at this level, and I don't necessarily need all of the full performance. I'm getting 95% of the stock performance out of the CPU, right? And for my video editing workload, the GPU does a lot of the heavy lifting anyway, so that's not necessary. Now, one thing the D12L did really well was actually minimizing the amount of impact that it took on the CPU times, and that was set up as a rear intake. So we do have to keep in mind the higher RPM with that setup and the louder single fan, but the CPU thermals are getting impacted a lot by the running GPU, and that's kind of expected, because I chose to exhaust with this rad. We're helping the GPU out. So in this scenario, the GPU RPM being the same between the two tests, it actually doesn't need to run this fast. It was happy to settle in at 1900 RPM, and the temps were still better than the M2 setup, and it's way quieter. So overall, I think the biggest benefit going from M2 to M3 in this setup was the noise reduction. And even though it's a little bit wider, a little bit taller, these dimensions are put to good use here, because it allowed me to be able to fit fans at the top in spite of this mini-itx board and some of the other physical obstructions at the bottom of the board, really. And it allowed me to fully mount the radiator here at the bottom of the case. And then I have a full 120mm fan at the back, which in the M2 you can only use a 92mm fan, but I was running an air cooler, so that 92mm fan would have in some way limited the 120mm fan, or at least it would have had to run faster and much louder, and I didn't want any of that. So yeah, this is not something that you'll see often, I think, and it is viable. That's what I wanted to know. And with the right unit, you can absolutely make this work. And like I mentioned, probably swap in the combo DEC block soon, and maybe just do the whole thing up as a cool build. I'll keep you all updated on this one. Make sure you give a like and are subbed. Links for the stuff I discussed down below. Big thanks for watching.